ever stop and think about how much we understand in a conversation without it ever actually being said out loud? It's pretty amazing, right? We're always working with this shared knowledge, these unspoken assumptions. Well, in this explainer, we're going to peek behind the curtain and look at the linguistic machinery that makes that unspoken story possible.
So, how much are we really talking about here? I mean, how much is actually left unsaid? Well, it turns out a lot. And this isn't just some vague idea. The field of pragmatics has a really precise way of analyzing all this invisible meaning. It's all about understanding the gap between the literal words someone says and the full message they're actually sending. To get a handle on this world of invisible meaning, we need to meet our two main characters. They're the technical terms for two different kinds of unstated information: presupposition and entailment. Let's break down what each of these really means.
Okay, let's start with the book definitions. A presupposition, that's an assumption the speaker is making. It's the background info they think is already true and shared before they even open their mouth. An entailment, on the other hand, is a logical consequence of this sentence itself. If the sentence is true, the entailment has to be true. No way around it.
And this right here, this is the key thing to remember. Presuppositions belong to people. They are human assumptions and, they can actually be wrong. But entailments, they belong to sentences. They're cold, hard, logical facts that follow from the words themselves no matter what the speaker is thinking. So one is about belief and the other is about pure logic.
All right, let's zoom in on our first character, presupposition, and get to know it a little better. We're going to look at what it is, how it behaves, and most importantly, how we can spot one out in the wild. Here's a super simple classic example. If I say sentence P, Mary's dog is cute, I am presupposing proposition Q, which is Mary has a dog. See what's happening? The cuteness of the dog is the main point I'm asserting, but the fact that the dog even exists, well, that's what I'm assuming we both already accept as background truth. And here's how linguists write this down. That little P with the two arrows pointing to Q, that's just the standard geeky way to write P presupposes Q. It's a nice, clean shorthand for the relationship between what someone says and what they assume.
So, how can we be sure that Mary has a dog is a presupposition and not something else? Well, linguists have this awesome tool called the negation test. And the rule is simple. A true presupposition will survive, it will stay constant, even when you make the main sentence negative.
Okay, so first, let's look at the original positive sentence again. Mary's dog is cute. This clearly carries that background assumption, that presupposition that Mary has a dog. Easy enough. Now, let's run the test.
Now, what if I say Mary's dog isn't cute? Notice what just happened. I've completely flipped the main point. I'm now saying the dog is not cute, but the background assumption that Mary has a dog is still there. It totally survived the negation. That's the signal. That's how we know it's a real presupposition. So where do these things even come from? Presuppositions don't just pop up randomly. They're often triggered by specific words and even the way a sentence is structured. These little linguistic flags tell us that a speaker might be making an assumption.
This is a fantastic example of a structural trigger. We sometimes call this a loaded question. How fast was the car going when it ran the red light? The very way this question is built presupposes that the car did in fact run the red light. If you answer the question with a speed of 50 miles an hour, you've just accepted the hidden assumption as true without even realizing it. It's a really subtle but powerful way to frame a belief as a fact.
All right, so things are about to get a little more complicated. We usually expect that the presuppositions from a simple sentence will just carry over or project when that sentence is part of a bigger, more complex one. But sometimes they don't. And this creates what linguists call the projection problem. So what is the projection problem? It's what happens when a background assumption that works just fine in a small phrase gets completely canceled out or just disappears in a larger conversation. The meaning of the part just doesn't survive to become the meaning of the whole. Let's see this in action with a bit of soap opera drama. So, Shirley says this: the word regrets is one of those triggers we talked about. For George to regret something, that something has to have actually happened, right? So, Shirley's statement presupposes that George did get Mary pregnant. But then, Jean jumps in with a direct contradiction. She states a new piece of information that just flatly denies Shirley's background assumption. This sets up a major conflict right in the middle of the conversation.
And here it is, the heart of the conflict. you've got the presupposition from Shirley's statement, he did it, clashing head-to-head with the entailment from Jean's statement. Remember, an entailment is the logical consequence of what's asserted. So Jean's sentence, he didn't get her pregnant, logically entails, he didn't get her pregnant.
So who wins this fight? The entailment. Every time. A direct statement and its logical consequences are just way more powerful than a background assumption. The presupposition gets completely destroyed. It fails to project into the bigger picture of the conversation.
Okay, so we've seen how a direct statement, an entailment, can just obliterate an assumption. But speakers can also use entailments in a much more subtle way to guide our attention. They don't just throw facts out there. They actively pick which logical consequence of their sentence is the most important one for us to focus on. Take this sentence. If I say, Rover chased 3 squirrels, putting all the stress on 3, I'm telling you that the number is the most important part. The new information, the focus, isn't about who did the chasing or what was chased, but how many. But watch this. If I just shift the stress and say, Rover chased 3 squirrels, the whole focus of the sentence changes. Now, the main point is the identity of the chaser. The background information is that somebody chased 3 squirrels, and the new, important information, the point of my sentence, is that it was Rover. And of course, there's a technical term for this. It's called the foreground entailment. It's a specific logical consequence that a speaker intentionally puts a spotlight on. By using stress, they're basically saying, hey, of all the things my sentence logically means, this is the part you really need to pay attention to. It's an active choice to manage where the listener looks. So let's wrap all this up. We've seen that presuppositions are the speaker's assumptions. They belong to people. Entailments are the sentence's logical consequences. They belong to the logic of the language. And when they clash, the direct logic of the entailment always wins out. And finally, speakers have these cool tools like stress to direct our focus and guide us to exactly the meaning they intend.
And that leaves us with one last thought. Now that you know the difference between a speaker's assumption and a sentence's logical fact, start listening for it. How often do you see people in ads, in politics, maybe even in your own family, using a presupposition to sneak an idea past you, hoping you'll just accept it as a shared fact without ever really questioning it? Once you start looking, you'll be amazed at how often you see it.